Thor adds the cosmic and magical aspects to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we're introduced to the idea of gods and monsters existing alongside all these science-based heroes. Up until this point, Marvel Studios had only done grounded in real-world stories. We hadn't really seen a character on this kind of level before. We'd had stories about corporations and a scientist looking for a cure for his raging monster inside. We have characters who are dressed in an iron suit and a guy who turns into a Hulk. But we hadn't seen the gods of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's really what Thor introduces. But this movie found a way to introduce the mythical world to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Originally, this movie was going to be produced by Sam Raimi back in 1990, but this was refused for whatever reason. But later, Thor began to be pitched again to other studios, with one idea highlighting that Thor was going to be this Old Testament god who would transition into a New Testament god. And there is that religious aspect that they were going to put into the movie. Eventually, however, Marvel produced Matthew Vaughn's script, and this resulted in the Thor movie that we see today. Whilst we do see the idea of Thor transitioning from an old god into a new god, because he's basically from the past, and he's transitioning into into modern day. If you had seen the movie like that, it would have backfired, because a lot of people a lot of people have their own spiritual beliefs, and particularly with Thor being this, being a Norse mythology type character, I think it would have been hard to get by for the religious crowd. The religious aspects are barely discussed in the film, and the mythical aspects that Thor is based on is downplayed, is really downplayed, in favour of this science and magic based theme that this movie presents. Some of Thor's failures largely are in its own movies. Thor does a lot better in Avengers and in the Avengers movie than he tends to do in his own movies. The types of stories that are used, the dialogue and the cast all factor into some of the failures that this movie and its sequel has. And Idris Elba and Natalie Portman have reportedly said that they don't want to be in these Marvel films. And you do kind of get that feeling that they don't want to be there. It's less... Those two characters are given a lot more to do in the sequel. When a person isn't enjoying their work, it brings the quality of the movie down. And why not refuse flat out if you don't want to work on this type of film. It's maddening. And quite frankly, Natalie Portman as Jane Foster isn't the most amazing thing ever. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But if you don't want to be there, leave. The best thing to come out of Thor, though, was Tom Hiddleston's role as Loki. Loki is by far one of the best villains seen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You can just see that he really enjoys this role. And, again, he wants to be there. He wants to work. And you can see that in this movie and the Avengers, that he is enjoying playing this character. And it's really, really nice to see as well. And Chris Hemsworth does a good job as well. He is better in Avengers than he is in this movie. But again, he wants to be in this movie. And it's great that at least the main two male leads actually want to be there. So basically, we have the journey of Thor from boy king to a man who wants to protect people because he values their lives and wishes to serve rather than be served. And that is a really interesting thing, in my opinion, that we have a king that reflects the ideals of not just a superhero, but a king in general. I come from the UK, and the UK's royal family are very much about serving the people. And that's kind of what we see with Thor, is we have a character who isn't out for himself, but he's out to serve other people in not only his kingdom, but people from Earth and other worlds. The humour, however, does overshadow the story elements, and some of the humour come out as annoying rather than funny. One particular character that comes to mind who's always cracking wires is Darcy. Really irritating moments, which take away from the story elements that the movie's trying to do. Putting Thor into the human world takes away the charm of seeing the Asgard world. One of my favourite bits about this movie was Asgard. I didn't really particularly care about the Earth-based story, but I really, really liked the Asgard bits, and it's the exact same with the sequel. I really liked the Asgard-based story and the cosmic elements that I did with the Earth-based story. The problem is, Thor spends too much time on Earth, and we don't see him in his costume very much, and we don't really... And I think putting Thor on Earth takes away the interesting element that the movie presents. Yes, we need Thor to come to Earth so he can join the Avengers, and set him up, and set that character up. But it's kind of annoying because, again, it takes away the one good element that this movie was having. But yeah, I'm not saying this film is particularly awful, but it does have a lot of issues. But there are a lot of good ideas that are presented in the film. For example, the Asgardians are aliens in the movie, and that Midgard believed that they were gods because we didn't have the understanding of their culture and their technology. So we as humans came to believe the Asgardians were gods. So I really liked that that aspect, and also it keeps in line with the science-based theme that the movie was going with at the time. Because again, Iron Man and Incredible Hulk were both stories based in realism and based on science. And Thor basically combines the science aspects but introduces the magic elements and combines those two to create an interesting idea about how we perceive magic, and is magic just a higher form of science that we can't comprehend. It really is very interesting. And again, I also like Thor because he has character flaws. And like with Iron Man, he isn't living by a high moral compass like Captain America is. So Thor becomes really relatable as a character. He's a person who has to learn to not only become just a good warrior, but a person who can show humility and combine that with the fact that he's a god, and he's just a very interesting character. So the movie begins by establishing that the Norse mythology is real, and that Asgardians have protected Midgard from the frost giants. And over the years, Asgard faded into legend. And as new legends begin to form with Thor becoming king, Loki potentially becoming king, and new legends sort of taking over from the old ones. That aspect is really good, in my opinion, because, again, like I said, the backstory is more interesting than the stuff going on with Earth. I really like the fact that, the Asgardians were aliens, but they're also protectors of the Nine Realms. And it's really interesting the fact that we transition from from legend to real life. And again, the setup is great because it sets Asgard as noble warriors driven to protect other worlds and Midgard. So basically, we have the frost giants resurface on Asgard during Thor's ceremony, where he is to become king. And this basically prompts Thor to go to the frost giant's home, but nearly starts out a war because of it. Thor is then exiled to Earth, where he meets Jane Foster, Darcy, and Dr. Selvig, and the Earth-based group for Thor. And we meanwhile have Loki sort of learning about his true heritage as a frost giant, and in order to prove his worth to Odin, he basically plays he basically plays Thor and the frost giants, and basically plays Asgard against the frost giants to basically eradicate the frost giants, which is again a really interesting part about this story, is how Loki's machinations affect what's going on in this movie. I kind of noticed some slight parallels with The Lion King in this movie. I appreciate there are a lot of differences, but I did kind of feel like there were a lot of parallels with The Lion King. And basically how it's very similar to The Lion King is because Simba was exiled from his home after a mistake that he created. And basically Simba learns humility and responsibility whilst in exile. So when he comes back and faces his family member, he comes back as a different but more stronger person. And that's really very similar to Thor's journey. Thor nearly causes a war between the frost giants and Asgard, and this causes him to be exiled to Earth. And basically whilst on Earth, Thor has to learn about humility, learn about the responsibilities that, yes, he's a god, but he's also, but he isn't just a god, he can be so much more. One of my main problems is with Thor's exile, is he treats it more like a holiday than he does about a true, he's truly exiled. And the problem is the way this movie is paced, and the timeline of when the movie is happening, it makes Thor's character arc done in 3 days. And 3 days to a week is not long enough for a character to really learn anything. I kind of think it needed to be just a little bit longer in order to make Thor's character arc more credible. And again, it gives Thor this artificial character arc. Examining the character more closely, we see a proud king, like Simba. And when Thor goes to the Frost Giant's home, or the Mammoth Graveyard, if you want to continue with the Lion King stuff, when Thor goes there, he goes as a boy. He's a man, but I'm going with the idea that he's a boy king. But when Thor goes to the Frost Giant's home, he's a child. He doesn't quite understand the gravitude of what he's causing, what dangers he's posing to himself, his friends, and his kingdom, by going into the lion's den. Mainly this could be due to the fact that Thor is raised in a warrior-like society where might tends to make right rather than the brain sort of taking over, and and there actually be some thought process into the decisions. Most recently, I played a game called Too Human, which is all about the Norse mythology gods and sort of their warrior-like society. And what was interesting in that game, and what's interesting about this movie, is how similar these two things are. And Thor is growing up in a warrior society, and we do see that a bit more in the sequel. But Thor is growing up in a warrior society, and sometimes that wins out. Thor's exile to Midgard really shows him a different path from this warrior-like society, and I do think that helps his character, however artificial it might be. I do think that helps his character arc. Because the problem is Thor was never shown other lifestyles. All Thor knew was how to fight and how to, and how important being the mighty Thor was. But he couldn't appreciate, that there were other factors, that there were other ways of living. And whilst he's in Midgard, he does learn how to become humble and show humility. But again, the problem is it was too fast. There was not enough time that was allowed to pass so that he could truly learn from his mistakes. It takes more than falling in love with some girl and not being able to pick up a hammer to show humility. It takes more than just a few little minor details to create a big major detail. Another thing that really irritates me about the Thor character and the way Thor is treated is that Thor is sort of treated like a sex object, rather than as an individual. And what really irritates me about this is that it's essentially male objectification. Women tend to feel objectified when men look at them as a sex object. And women tend to be quite defensive about that sort of thing. So why are we doing the same with this Thor character? Yes, I do understand the appeal of the body, but I don't understand why Thor is sexually objectified. Because characters like Darcy and Jane Foster, what do they see in Thor exactly? Because all Thor has really shown is that he's a very dangerous individual. He hasn't really proved that he's not a dangerous individual. And yes, he's mysterious and he's sexy, but what's there beyond that? And that's what really irritates me about the Thor character. And he's not as objectified in the Avengers, because somehow Joss Whedon manages to give that character quite a lot of goodness. But again, in this character, in the Thor movies, he's just objectified really, really badly. So now we move on to Jane Foster. Jane Foster is the primary love interest in the movie, and she's studying the Asgardians. And her interaction with Thor appears to, again, be more sexual than genuine interest in who he really is. And maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but that is all Jane Foster seems to like about Thor. And unlike other relationships in this movie universe, Pepper and Tony's relationship is a really, really good one. Pepper and Tony really value one another, whilst Steve and Peggy come from a shared mutual respect for one another. But all Jane appears to like about Thor is his body. And I don't think it's a really good way to start a relationship. And again, it's worse in the sequel, but the way that's set up in this movie, it's really, really irritating. And I do feel like Jane and Thor are essentially a holiday couple, but don't have enough common ground to build a relationship. Dr. Selvig is the Yinsen or the Eriksson for Thor, but is kind of more of a mentor for Jane Foster. But if Selvig did have a role, it is the mentor role. He's sort of the joint mentor for Thor and Jane Foster. And I really, really like Selvig. Selvig is the one character who genuinely tries to help Thor and contributes a lot to his character arc. He's also very protecting of Jane Foster. He's just an all-round good character, that really contributes to Thor's character arc, but also defends Jane Foster's. And now we get on to Darcy. Darcy, flippin' Darcy, who makes the Facebook references, who is basically the comic book, the comic relief of this movie. Darcy is just a very irritating character. I'm sorry, but her character is pointless. She contributes nothing to the plot. She contributes nothing to Thor's character arc. And she's not even a real scientist. And doesn't seem to show any interest in science. Why is this character even in this movie? Seriously, why is this character even in this movie? She contributes nothing to the plot of the movie. And I very much doubt she's ever really contributed to anything, to any of Jane Foster's research. Now we get on to Lady Sif and the Warriors 3. Lady Sif is a great character. And in my opinion, she would be the better love interest for Thor. In the comics, Lady Sif and Thor do date. And I just feel as if Lady Sif rather, sorry, I think about something completely different, but Lady Sif is just a really, really great character. And why I like Lady Sif a bit more than I do with Jane Foster is because at least Lady Sif has a common ground with Thor. And I also really, really like the way Lady Sif plays against Thor. It's a couple/friend thing. And it just, for me, it just really, really works well. S.H.I.E.L.D. are also a major part of this movie, with Phil Coulson really being at the front and centre of what's going on. Phil Coulson's role is expanded in this movie, and Coulson basically begins to bridge together all of these heroes. As for the villains, first off, Loki. Loki is one of the best villains in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And Loki is indeed a trickster in this movie, and it sort of sets the stage for the Frost Giants going up against the Asgardians. And I just really, really like the character. The character is very interesting and is the cause of his own downfall ultimately, which is again another interesting element. And the thing is about Loki is Loki actually has great qualities that could see him become a very, very good leader. But it's his lust for power which removes these qualities when we see him in Avengers. While Thor becomes this humble and noble-like character, Loki becomes the opposite, and it's a really great parallel between these two characters. And what sets Loki apart from everyone else is that Loki is a schemer that plays both good and evil. And I don't think Loki is necessarily an evil character. But I don't think he's misguided either. He's somewhere in that grey area where he's his own sort of villain in a sense. And I think Loki has a lot of self-worth issues. Like, Loki is deemed unworthy by the Hammer for a reason. And I think a lot of this plays into Loki's self-worth about being a frost giant. Thor is proven worthy as a king and as a man because he learns to value life, whilst Loki would rather destroy the frost giants and the very nature that he is himself, then embrace that. The frost giants serve a very minimal threat. They don't do very much and appear to be just another faction like Ten Rings and Hydra. Just another group to throw into this movie. Right, so how Thor factors in to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Thor introduces the magic concept, but keeps it grounded in realism. And again, it does this by establishing that magic is just science that humans can't comprehend. This is very, very interesting. It doesn't separate Thor from everything else, but it includes Thor into the science-based idea that these movies have. The movie also establishes some of the Marvel cosmic universe, and this sets up the very early foundations of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And whilst we don't get to see the rest of the universe like we do with Guardians of the Galaxy, we learn the fact, in this movie, we learn the fact that aliens exist. And that there are other worlds, apart from Earth. We see multiple references to, several important things that we are now only just beginning to realize what they are. For instance, we see the Eye of Agamotto, the Tablet of Life and Death, the Warlock's Eye, and Infinity Gauntlet, and finally the Eternal Flame which the Frost Giants are seeking in the movie. Some of the items I have mentioned are the Doctor Strange talismans that he uses in the comics. Like the Eye of Agamotto particularly is a major thing that Doctor Strange uses. And it's very interesting to know the fact that we are getting a Doctor Strange movie very soon. And seeing this reference here. And it's a great little reference. We see the Infinity Gauntlet. And the Infinity Gauntlet is straight up referencing Thanos. Because in the Infinity Gauntlet comic, Thanos basically united the Infinity Gems, as they're called in the comics. And if you don't know what the Infinity Gems are, the Infinity Gems are the Infinity Stones that this movie is using. And basically what that is doing is that is setting up Infinity War, which is the upcoming Avengers movie. When the Destroyer came to destroy that small town, Nick Fury came to believe that that was a wake-up call, and begins to plan, to make plans to safeguard the Earth a bit better. And S.H.I.E.L.D. would basically utilize the Destroyer technology to basically create weapons. For example, the weapon that Phil Coulson uses in the Avengers. And Nick Fury also uses the Tesseract, which is seen in the post-credits of this scene, which was found in Captain America: First Avenger. And basically that becomes a major element for the Avengers. I'm not altogether sure why Nick Fury wanted to use the technology for the Tesseract, but my personal theory is that the Tesseract was meant to power these weapons that Nick Fury was creating. We also have Hawkeye being set up as in a minimal role in this movie. Again, setting him up for the Avengers. So that's the end of my Thor review. It felt a lot more shorter than it really was. But yeah, that's the end of this review. I do hope you have enjoyed the review, and I shall see you all very soon for the next review.